I totally forgot what day it was there for a second, just because my mind went blank. And on that note, that's okay when that happens. It's kind of funny how we get bent out of shape when all of a sudden, like, we hesitate or we stumble over our words, or we're not sure about something. We're like, oh my God, what will people think? They'll think that you're a normal human being because they do the same thing. And unless, of course, they're insecure about that thing, in which case maybe they're judging you, but they're only judging you because they're insecure. And so that said, it's Monday, and we're going to kick off Dualistic Unity Raw with, I think, a bit of a deeper dive. And what I mean is that yesterday we were having a walk, and we got into the topic of God. And what I mean by got into the topic was Andrew decided to pull out his phone and hit record. And where normally he would initiate the conversation, I decided to ask him about God. Is there a God? And if so, can you believe in it? And it spawned a bunch of different answers from Andrew and Amanda and myself. And it ended up being, kind of a fun conversation, though admittedly, after the fact, we were kind of thinking, like, there's a lot said there. I'm not sure I understood all of that, or that it was even near complete. It seems like there's a lot more to that conversation. And so I figured that would be a good place to kick off today. How you doing there, Andrew? Oh, and I should mention to the listener, Andrew is not with us personally today. He is currently at home in his apartment awaiting a package. And so instead, we are doing the remote conversation thing. Amanda did come over today and is doing the episode from the office. And so if there is a bit of a lag, that is why. But otherwise, this is kind of cool. We haven't done this in a while. How's it going, buddy?
It's going quite well. Yeah, I am in my new spot down in Nanaimo, or up in Nanaimo rather, waiting for a package. It's been attempted to have been dropped off twice now. They missed, and after the third time, it gets sent back to the U.S. and I've already paid a bunch for it to get shipped internationally. So I'm like, all right, we got to be sure. And then it was supposed to get here by noon, and now it's not till 5. And so I'm like, shit, I'm not going to be there for this stuff. And then, like, well, you know what? We'll pivot and we'll move and shift. But yeah, that's an additional backstory on that situation. But yeah, that conversation yesterday, and the question, even because the initial question, is there a God and can you believe in it? Initially, I said no. And I was like, kind of wait a second. And I had, the initial processing of it, because a lot of times I'm realizing with, certain responses to things or ways that I responded were very habitual. Like if someone asked about a certain topic or a certain thing, there was like, a go-to sort of grab bag thing. And it was never a fresh response so much. Nowadays, I feel like it is kind of whatever's being expressed there. And my response to the situation that I'm in kind of dictates where I'm at, like my assumption about a given situation. If I'm judging it, I'm going to feel that judgment myself. And so when it is not being judged, or I'm not judging where I'm at and I'm just where I'm at, and just leaving it at that, there's the opportunity to see things in a lot of different ways and not kind of confine yourself. So after that response, I'm like going all around. It's like, there's nothing to say there's anything wrong with being roundabout a little bit, but reflecting on that, yeah, there is a God, but it's not the one that you're thinking about or talking about or believing in. It's none of those things that have to do even with your mind so much or thoughts, but it's like reality itself right now. It's what's happening right now. It's what's playing out right now. It's what you are right now. And that sense of, because we've talked about this a number of times and haven't really re-explored it in a bit, it feels like. And initially, I would talk about it very freely and openly, like, oh yeah, you're God, I'm God. And now I have a lot more hesitation with that, because I think it was very much this sense of like feeling good about it, but it doesn't mean that you're like, you can't feel good about that or think that it means something just because you are it. And it's like, you want to say God, you want to say any word, but like you're it. And so we have these stories about things, and then those necessitate a story about God, something else, someone else, instead of just, the freedom that comes with not looking to someone else so much, or relying upon an external thing to feel okay about yourself. Like, the freedom is that you can choose to feel okay about yourself and not judge yourself, but it requires you to let go of that sense of judgment or being able to do that, period. And without that there, it's kind of like an unstable, very uncertain feeling. But, having faith is just taking that step through each moment, even when you are kind of unsure or hesitant, is just taking the step and then, finding out what's there after you take the step. But it's not about necessarily having a guarantee that the step is going to play out in a certain way, or that you're going to play out in a certain way, from anything from decisions that you make to, responding to whether or not God exists and if you can believe in it, and not judging yourself for, even saying that it does and you're it, no matter how hesitant it seems to come out or what you assume you should or shouldn't say. It's like, it's kind of irrelevant to what's happening. So
That's a good answer. And honestly, I think that we should take that and clip it to your original answer.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
Clip your original answer, and then right from the point where you're like, I was thinking about my original answer, and just clip that, because that's like more of a complete answer, right? Because you allow yourself to go through the process. It's not just settling on, yeah, that's what I think about God, right? But actually going through it later on and going, hold up, I've learned a lot of shit since I made that decision. Like, I've taken in a lot more. Like, all of a sudden the word God doesn't mean the same fucking thing. Then again, thinking about myself doesn't mean the same fucking thing either. And so everything has to be reassessed. Everything has to be, reanalyzed, or not reanalyzed, but rather, just, it has to have a chance to settle again. It has to be expressed anew. And so I was stoked about that answer.
I love that. That's wonderful. Cause it's like when you're thinking I am God, and how it used to be, where it came from when we used to say that, it's like, now it's like the I and the God are up for so much debate. It's like, the only thing that seems solid is that am in the middle. I am God is like, I don't know about the I, don't know about the God, but the am sounds like it's about like existence, like existence exists. And when we're thinking about what the I could mean and what the God could mean, it includes everything from feeling like something in the universe and everything in that universe. And the phrase that came to mind was like, you're never going to reach tomorrow. You're only going to live through today. So as much as we can think about the next step, about tomorrow, about the future, about our life as when it's quote unquote complete and we've died, it's like, we're never going to reach that. We're always going to be here and now. We're always going to be on this step. And so that also includes all those tomorrows. It just feels like tomorrow is a place to get to, but tomorrow is just another version of today. And that next step that you're thinking about is just another version of this step. The only thing that you're ever experiencing, everything that's included in the am, the I, and the God, no matter from the perspective that you're looking at them from. So it's a lot more enjoyable to explore it without it needing to have a specific destination in mind, because the destination changes depending on the view of the explorer who's trying to get there. But we're not trying to get anywhere because we're only experiencing this step. And this is the only thing that includes everything, all the yesterdays, all the tomorrows. It's all this step. It's all God. It's all life. It's all existing right now.
Well, that's the funny part, right? But it depends on your perception, right? And that's the difference, is that either you're on a trajectory through time in which case you're always trying to get to tomorrow, or tomorrow's always coming, or there is only the attention to today, because you remember that tomorrow it will be today.
Yeah.
To you, from your experience, tomorrow's going to be today, because that's all it ever is.
Yeah.
That's all it ever is. And so that relationship with today, with now, with the experience you're having, that is the great frontier, the unexplored. What the fuck is happening right now? Not where am I going into a different version of right now, where it's still fucking right now, right? But what is that experience that I'm having with now? When I'm not superimposing my judgment, superimposing some filter over it that twists my perception of it, that makes me misconstrue things according to a storyline that I'm holding on to, and therefore my brain is cherry picking the fuck out of to validate. What is that that's happening outside of my conscious construct of it? And I think that is the point, is if you can't have that conscious construct of it, if every construct, if every concept, if every attempt to describe it will always fall short, then that is why you can't believe in God. It's because anything you do, immediately you've limited. And in limiting it, you've limited yourself as separate from it. And so that's why it's so fucking paradoxical, because it's not to say that there isn't a God. It's to say that the concept itself is never the reality. In the same way, the concept of you is never the reality, and that's where you find the connection. That's the only way you can find the connection. And so belief is an avoidance of that, right? The structure, the concepts, even the word. This is why what they did with Jesus is like the most blasphemous fucking thing, like, and literally goes against religion up until that point where idolatry was something to avoid, an idol. To have an idol to worship is something that Christianity straight up fucking just violates. It's just like, yep, it's Jesus. Right? So they create an image of God. And that's why it's such an avoidance of the reality, because immediately there's the sinner, there's the believer, there's the one up there and all of us down here, and that whole concept. See, I think that it's important to go through the cycles back and forth. I've often said, in terms of like psychedelics, for example, some trips are about you, some trips are about everything, right? But that's the spectrum of the mind when you allow yourself to go through it. Sometimes it's about your relationship with the objective world or the perception of it. Sometimes it's about your relationship with the subjective experience of that world, which may just be the world itself. And to be able to go back and forth is literally to go back and forth, just like the picture that's on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, where with God and man almost touching or touching fingers. That's us. See, that touching there, that's the spectrum of our mind. That's the middle, right, between God and man, because they're both the same experience under a different perception.
And that experience of humanity, it will fluctuate based on where the priority exists, like where the priority lies. Like, is it about me or is it about this whole thing? And like those feelings, those experiences feel like they kind of go hand in hand. If it's about you, like, you're going to experience reality making it about you. Or if you are making it about you, then everything's going to kind of be surrounding that. When it's not the case so much, it's like there's more space, and it's like space for, experience, but it can't mean anything about you. And you can try and tie the two together, but without that, it's like you don't get that sense of direction so much, but you also don't feel like you need it so much. It's just like, on one of our walks yesterday, talking about appropriateness, like, what is appropriate right now? And there's a degree of self-honesty where it's like, it's like for yourself, like Mary Kate on Patreon the other day was, oh shoot, I shouldn't mention Patreon stuff on whatever. It's already out there. Someone was talking about, never mind. I'm not going to say it now that I mentioned it. I can name, because those are behind paywalls and whatnot, but
Generalize.
Yeah. just talking about oh man, I can't even remember it now. Never mind.
Well,
We're gonna keep rolling. But yeah, like even even this right here, I'm like, there. I'm like so badly want to remember that thing, and it's like
You
it's
and me
okay.
both.
It's
That's
just
right.
fine.
I'm in
Yeah.
the same boat.
Yeah.
Straight up, I'm like, what the fuck were we talking about? You know?
Yeah. I know, and I'm like, oh, I can feel. It's like I'm seeing a wall, and there's like a door, and I'm like, oh, it's right there. You gotta find it or figure it out. And it's like, no, it's not. It's not gonna
Yeah, but
happen.
you're looking for the door with your eye, like it feels like with a blindfold or with the eyes closed. You're like, I can feel the handle. The handle's over here. No, fuck, another brick. God damn it! You know, it's like, oh, the handle's here. No, another brick. Damn it! You know?
Talking about appropriateness or
Yeah,
something.
Yeah.
appropriateness. And then we were discussing somebody having a conversation on our Patreon page.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wherein they showed something that was, I believe, appropriate.
Yeah. Oh man, that's brutal.
An escape.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot
Yeah,
of appropriateness
maybe it's
comes down
messages
to
from that, but
sensitivity. Like you're just being sensitive to the moment and you're feeling it out, because being appropriate doesn't mean following a rule. I followed this rule, and so that's how I know that this is appropriate. I know it meets this criteria, this official, socially approved criteria, and I know it's appropriate. It's like you feel it. You feel it through that sensitivity of paying attention to the people around you and how the people around you are the moment that you're living. It's your whole life is in that moment. So it makes sense to be sensitive to the moment that you're helping to create. So it's not about being appropriate and not breaking a rule. It's about, being sensitive to the moment that you're in, because not only are you creating it, but you're living it. So it makes sense for you to be sensitive to that as a whole, and not just trying to follow some rule of, is this appropriate or not, and asking that question versus just paying attention. You don't really have to ask that question because you're feeling out the quote unquote response that feels like it matches the moment that you're in the middle of making.
Yeah, and like not making moments about you one way or the other, like in a sense of drawing attention, even for a specific reason, whether it's a fear response or like a build yourself up, like beating yourself up or building yourself up, is both making it about you. And so not doing that, like being able to go through things and just like kind of shake it pretty quick instead of mulling over it, assuming that you should have done things differently. It's just like, right now, new opportunity, right now, new opportunity, like to shift focus. And sometimes there's habitual focuses that we're just so used to being the response to certain things, like, oh, feeling uncomfortable right now, so I'm gonna like eat some extra food, like eat some sweets, and there can just be this immediate response, or like unfamiliar environments, unfamiliar situations, immediately respond by, being more afraid or concerned, or then like trying to jump to some way of validating that like you're correct, or you should or you shouldn't be in a certain spot in life. But each and every time, like, you have the chance to not make it about you as you go, and like your whole life is going to circle one way or the other. Are you making it about you or not? One way or the other, because the self-judgment can be just as much of a, make it about me, and instead of just being responsible, it can feel like like an easy way out almost. But
it kind of reminds me of a movie. Like, we were talking about this the other day before we were watching Obi-Wan. And we were talking about how it's so very different to watch a movie, to actually watch the movie, as opposed to get lost in thoughts in your head about, whether or not other people are understanding more about the movie than you are, or what's going to happen later, or you're just passing time and the movie's just kind of going by while you're lost in this narrative about yourself. And so it's not that the movie doesn't continue on. It's not that life doesn't continue on, but nothing makes fucking sense, right? All of a sudden you get to a part of the movie and you're like, how the fuck did we get here? Nothing makes sense, because frankly, you just haven't been watching. And life is the very same way, where all of a sudden, if you are watching, the next part of the story seems appropriate to the rest of the story, because you've been watching. You're like, oh, No, okay, that makes sense. And even if it's a sudden surprise twist, you're like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. But that also makes sense, right? Because you're paying attention, right? But if you're not paying attention, if you're making it about you, as you were saying, in one way or another, if it's about the story of you and not all of the story, right? The actual thing that's happening, which isn't just a story of you. It'd be like trying to make a movie where every character that you meet suddenly has their own screen. You imagine a movie like that? It'd be so hard to pay attention to. You wouldn't know who to pay attention to, right? But you'd be fucking paying attention, right? And all of a sudden you would start seeing patterns. You'd start seeing how some of the characters are doing the same kind of things and thinking the same kind of way, or reacting in similar ways, or going through similar situations. All of a sudden you are processing a whole other type of story that has nothing to do with a singular character on a trajectory that's simplistic, and everything to do with a complicated, interwoven active intelligence on everybody's part. And so it just changes everything. And that's very much why it's so important to pay attention. Because if you get caught on any one of those single characters, you miss everything else.
And focusing on that is just it's again making it about you, whatever that is, like one way or another. Because like sometimes I'll feel like, oh, talking about this stuff, like being able to respond to people who have gone through things or through certain things, like I have to go through more stuff, like more difficult stuff, instead of realizing like, no, there's just an ability to pay attention, to things and continue to go through stuff without so much hesitation, but it's still like letting go of my own judgment in the immediacy, because one way or the other, depending on my response to like what's actually going on in reality, like actual situations, I'm going to have experience, like thoughts or perceptions that try and validate whatever perspective I initially have. And if I'm not feeling so certain and willing to just like, oh, keep paying attention. Oh, there's things here that, haven't been paying so much attention to, and respond to that and just keep on that, like continue with that without, so much of a quote unquote rest for, well, yeah, but me, but this thing, but me. And it's like, you can do that, but your experience is going to suffer instead of just continuing to pay attention and like continue to live based on that, based on that sensitivity. Which sometimes it's like, well, someone tell me, what the next best thing to do is. It's like, yeah, but you don't get that. It's on you to just keep being sensitive. And like, if you don't feel like you've made that many decisions for yourself, just like make some decisions and like do some stuff.
Jump in. He goes, why not? And I like that point where you're like, it's the sensitivity and you want someone to tell you, but that's not sensitivity. That's a shortcut. So it's either be sensitive or attempt to reach for a shortcut that doesn't exist. And so it's just delayed sensitivity. And it's so funny that so many times I would worry, or I would think that it'd be so much more hard work to quote unquote be responsible and to be sensitive, not realizing how much harder I was making it by trying to go for the shortcuts. Always made it that much longer. It reminds me of the story of the student who asked the teacher, if I how long does it take to get enlightened? It's like 10 years. Well, if I work twice as hard, how long will it be? 20 years. And it's like that same thing. Like if I work twice as hard, I'm thinking, how can I shortcut? And by trying to go for the shortcut, I've just doubled the amount of time that I needed. So like sensitivity isn't as bad as I want it to be, and the shortcut isn't as good as I want it to be. And how many times do I have to pursue a shortcut before I finally feel how not worth it is? And so it's just running into that same wall, the shortcut. I'm trying to get into a shortcut and I end up hitting this delay. And then I wonder why things are taking so long. It's just because I'm trying to skip the step that I'm on. You can't, like, that makes no sense. How can I How can I skip? I just can't skip a step like a staircase, because life doesn't work in that way. There's only this step. So you're never jumping to the next step, because the next step is only this step that looks different.
So I think it depends on where we live in terms of how that shortcut makes sense. Because if we live in the world, like if we live in the world of individual people and all of that, and we are simply a body on a rock going through the universe trying to survive, then it makes sense, you know, to try and take those shortcuts to get ahead, you know, just to skip developmental stages in order to find more security, to ensure
control.
survival, to have control, you know, get rid of all of your fears, all that stuff. It makes sense, but there's a consequence to it, which is why people end up, you know, suffering in the long run. And it's because there's another place to live, which is that subjective side. And that's very much what we're talking about here in terms of a journey. Not just a journey in the world, but a journey through the subjective experience of being you. Because that's what we're saying, is that the moment-to-moment experience of existing so often gets muddled with this need for control that comes from that idea of a perspective of a separate world, and all of the fears that go with that, the idea of me and the idea of the world and all of that. But I think what every singular root of religion and spirituality has been trying to communicate is there's an inner thing that's happening, that in fact there is an experience of the world that isn't ridden with conflict in the same way, that through faith and humility, which is really what we're talking about, not making it about you and simply continuing forward, that there is a path. And what makes sense to me is simply that when we're talking about that place where we're not making it about us, where we're just continuing forward, where we're paying attention to the best of our ability, what are we accessing? The best of our intelligence. We're accessing our intelligence unfiltered, present to the best of its capability, working at its optimum rate because it's no longer distracted by all of this shit. Well, what is that other than touching God? What is that other than what's been communicated by others as touching some fucking supreme intelligence that is the universe, right? We're touching it every time that we get in touch with ourselves. And so there's a path subjectively to that, and you can feel it when you are being yourself. We all know that feeling. It feels like freedom, right? But it also requires responsibility and attention and humility and faith, just to maintain and be in that feeling, right? The willingness to carry on and not even hold on to the feeling, you know, not to make it about any feeling at all. That feeling in itself is freedom. And I would say that that is the experience of God, you know, and people have communicated it as, oh my God, this intelligence is saying this. And it's just because they went back to the idea of themselves instead of simply being that intelligence in motion. And I think that that is the root of religion and spirituality as a whole, are just experiences wherein one got out of the way and recognized that there was something else going on, that they were. And they tried to communicate it, and everybody went, oh my God, we're part of some giant intelligence. And there's no way to say, well, no, it's yours. It's your intelligence. Because then they'd go, but you just said it was yours. And it's like, exactly. And there's the paradox. That's why it's so hard for us to see, because we don't want to admit we have the same root system.
Yeah, because to hold on to the actions, the selfish actions, the, you know, even your perspective of yourself. It's like you got to think about yourself. You know, like to feel good about yourself and how you're doing, instead of like freedom being like. It's so easy to assume that like, oh, freedom means, you know, ultimate comfort. It's like, no, it's the willingness to experience whatever's there, like whatever you are, just that willingness straight up to be yourself, like straight up to just show up, and like whatever's there is there, and not assuming that it should be so different, and like, be able to, you know, sleep at night with yourself and relax and breathe based on your own self-honesty. Like, it didn't make it about me today so much. And there were lots of points where it's like, I wanted to make it about me. There were things that, you know, typical habitual stuff, like responses, you start to realize how many things you use to feel better. I'm going to pause now because I got an apartment buzzer here.
Hey, that's great news. We will see you in a little bit.
Yes.
Go get that package, sir.
That's right.
That is awesome. I'm really appreciating the return to this conversation because admittedly this has been tickling my brain for, again, over half my life, because it's not just about the realization that I'm not what I think. It's not just the realization that I always lived relative to some idea of everyone else, that I was always an idea that had to fit in with the world that I was envisioning and conceptualizing. It's not just about that. And it's funny, I say it's not just about that as if that wasn't the most groundbreaking, mind-blowing, freeing fucking experience of my life. But along with that is the recognition that without that idea of myself, without that idea of me that separates me and makes me feel like I have to measure my value and all of that, I'm simply left as what is. I'm simply left as reality. And not as a human being in reality, because again, that goes with the idea of myself. I am a body in reality, but rather the recognition that if I don't look at myself as separate, I really don't have any reason to believe I am. Like, the idea that I am separate really does go hand in hand with the idea of me. But without that idea, there is an entirely different, entirely valid alternate perspective to reality itself, which is that this is all one thing, that we are all one thing. Because when you look at all of our experiences and all of what we communicate, not in what we believe or how we identify or the story that we tell ourselves, but in our experience of existing, in our ability to conceptualize ourselves, in the feeling of setting ourselves free of that. We all have that in common. And I find that to be just so fucking obvious. Like, it's so fucking obvious. But the idea of ourselves, again, makes it impossible to see, impossible to recognize. It makes it impossible to see that this is all one thing, so long as you are something. And that's funny because we have the perspective of division, right? Regardless of the fact that we know all energy is the same energy and can go nowhere. We don't seem to understand that all intelligence is also the same intelligence. And in the same way that energy can only be expressed differently, so can intelligence.
Right. And we say that in certain ways where it's like, everyone bleeds red. Everyone has, two eyes and one heart and wants to find, wants to have meaning in life. And we talk about how we share these universal things, and yet we sweep that under the rug the minute that we feel like we would like to take an assumption and treat it like it's a fact, and then science shows us that, theories change and things that we've called facts are no longer facts. And it's just like, we think that we have to have this place to settle on, and we never do. We never have to settle. But we can at least consider that we aren't so separate, and because we have no evidence to prove that we are separate. Well, we keep finding things that are pointing us in the same direction, which is just as beautifully put by Marie in the comments. Everything is everything. Existence is existence. It's all here. And so there's no way for existence to separate itself into subcategories, because that wouldn't make any sense. It's everything is here right now. And that's all. And that doesn't have to be defined or explained or controlled. And it's already being experienced. It's just that we question that experience and think that because we thought of a question, we have to come up with an answer. And it's just settling on a place in our imagination that doesn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah. The willingness to continue on despite the question mark of how you're doing, how things are going, what's going, like what even you're going to do next or say next. And that it's like that difference between things being about you and not, like that idea of yourself that's somehow separate is like incredibly constricting, like incredibly, like it's the antithesis of being relaxed, to the point that like you don't even realize how much underlying tension there is to maintaining, some sense of, well, I know what's best. what's best for me is what's best. It's like, yeah, but that's not, where's that gotten you? Continuing to believe that what's best for you, and like maybe it's not that, maybe it's not, because so many of those desires too stem from looking around. Like it's very rare that any of them genuinely, authentically come from yourself. It's like how to best fit in, how to get something in order to get something else based on what you've seen someone else do. And there's very little authenticity in that, but you can't be looking around to find that authenticity or a way to be more authentic based on, all of the environmental factors and the all the conceptual ways we've come up with for the right way to live or act or have a situation, have an interaction, a conversation. Like when there aren't so many rules on what you can and can't do, it's like there's more freedom just in that. It's just self-constricting more so, which is felt. If you're doing it conceptually, you're going to feel it physically as well.
Yeah, it's nuts to like, we made the rules. Why does it seem like such a mind-blowing thing to think like, oh, we can also change the rules. We can also scrap them, start over, not use the old rules.
Blasphemy. Blasphemy against rules.
Oh,
what do you think rules are for?
Who made them? We did.
Yeah, but they're rules.
It's like, do we think that like it's still the same considerations for infinity? For like things are always gonna, like the rules are always gonna apply in all conditions. Like that's absolute insanity to not be sensitive, to not see that the rules that we are currently so fixated on are not working, right? So when I hear someone talking about like what we're doing and they're like, things aren't so bad, I don't want to say that the rules aren't great. Like it's important that we have laws. And it's like, yeah, but we act as if having the laws reduces the crime, and it doesn't. It doesn't guarantee anything. So we have this structure, we have these rules, we have these laws, and we act as though they do the thing that they promised to do, but they do the opposite. And we don't want to acknowledge that the rules are not working. The current rules are not working.
How dare you? And I mean that sincerely. And it's because it's that blind faith in control. It's the blind faith in rules. This is the problem with concepts, is that we actually start to think they're fucking real. Like we came up with the concept of a rule. We're like, makes sense. There's a rule. Can't break that rule. Suddenly somebody breaks the rule. It's like, well, there's obviously something fucking wrong with them.
Kill them.
Right? That was it. There's obviously something wrong with them. If they don't recognize why that's a rule. It's a rule, which means you can't break it. It's like, well, I didn't make that rule. That's not the point. It's a rule.
I didn't agree with that rule. That's also not the point.
But that's it. And we just have this idea that the concept, the promise of a rule is what we believe in. The promise of a law is what we believe in. And yet we seem to forget that a law only works through agreement. That the law itself does nothing without people agreeing to it. In the same way as a $20 bill ain't worth shit without people agreeing it's worth $20. Because on its face, it's burnable paper.
Yeah. It's like, you want to get a sandwich for $10. It's like, you got to use in order to satisfy, hunger or something. It's like, you're not going to eat the dollar bill. So yeah, of course that's the case. But the amount of security and safety it feels like that gives, and yet that's the trade. That feeling of security and safety goes hand in hand with that feeling of freedom. Like if you want to feel free, it's looking at those things, your own rules and constrictions and laws for yourself, ways that you were taught, like right way to live, right way to act, right way to interact. Like all of those things, so many of our rules and laws have nothing to do with the law, like the official law that's out there stated by the government. They're self-imposed sorts of laws, like ways to act, things that you think make you more or less, whole, complete, like ways that you have to interact and do things instead of just, well, I'm me. I don't know what that means. and continuing to live and like utilizing yourself for the sake of experience and like being able to have free experience, you know, instead of being constricted, that you then feel the back and the forth yourself, you know, that experience of feeling relaxed and like cool with yourself goes hand in hand with not holding on to so many self-imposed limitations or need to judge yourself after going into something and being like, I don't know how this is going to go. You know, this conversation today, there's been certain things and I'm like, oh, you know, previously, would have judged myself a lot for that, but you don't have to. And if you can get through something and know that you're not going to judge yourself for it after the fact, there doesn't have to be so much concern, you know, going into situations either. So it's like, and then, yeah, without that, 'cause so much of our concern and fear is like anticipatory fear and concern. And then it's like, you're actually going through something that you're afraid of happening, you know, with like stage fright or something, or hesitancy, like forgetting that train of thought. It's like when you're in it, it's like, oh, yeah, this doesn't feel great right now, but like it's also what it is. I'm going to continue on with my life. And at some point, there will be other, you know, thought trains. And so if there isn't that initial concern going into it, then there's more, like less likely to happen, even. A lot of it's self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah, I want to go into that for a second because I think this is really important. Judgment, the judging of yourself. You know, it's funny because we were talking earlier about the experience of your intelligence, which is the same as saying the experience of authenticity or the experience of attention or the experience of presence. Like it all means the same thing. And what we're saying is that that experience is accessible to all of us because we are all in fact the same intelligence slash attention slash, you know, awareness or presence. We're all the same thing expressed differently. But when we exist within this idea of ourselves, it exists in the perception of time. It exists within the past and the future. And so because there's no attention, presence, clarity, responsibility, or intelligence to any major degree, because it's all self-involved, judging ourselves just seems to become second nature. But as soon as we allow ourselves to let go of the story, suddenly we feel more clear, we feel more aware, we feel more present, we feel more intelligent. We look at our lives and look at the bigger picture and go, oh, fuck, judging myself doesn't make any sense. And that is God's forgiveness. That is what is expressed underneath all the horse shit about begging God to forgive you. It's just being clear enough to recognize that your judgment was never God's judgment, because God's not as self-absorbed. You know, that the judgment doesn't make any sense at that level of intelligence that everybody's like, oh, God is the supreme being. It's like, and yet you still think he's insecure, you know, or that it's a he.
Mm-hmm. Or that he needs protection, or that he needs you to follow a certain set of rules, or else you won't be his favorite. It's like, it's just the concept of God is selfish because we are, you know, but the experience of God is being.
Exactly.
It's not even, you can't even, I mean, you could, but you know, at the minute that you try to explain that anymore, it just becomes another concept that you're depending on to feel comfortable. And so freedom feels untethered because you're not tying to yourself to the story. You're not tying the experience of right now to a story of then or what's next.
Yeah. Well, I think this is why Jesus said, you know, the kingdom of heaven is smaller than a mustard seed. Like it doesn't exist in the physical world. It has nothing to do with the physical world and everything to do with the subjective, which doesn't exist in a physical space. You know, and I think that was the whole point. Like it's in that non-concept, that thing that you just can't pin down, which is why I loved when we were talking about the fact that the universe is non-local. Because that's very much going back to the point. The universe itself is smaller than a mustard seed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And like there's times during these conversations where I'm like, there's so much there. It's like, no, this is real. This is what you think. This is, you know, that. And it's not to say that it's not, but it's like it doesn't mean the same sort of thing so much. Like there doesn't have to be that additional concern about everything as you continue to move forward, like paying attention, being responsible, like being like more self-honest about things. And then it's like you can assume that you got to keep going through stuff, but it's like you can assume that for the rest of your life, you know, assume that like you deserve to go through as like, you know, repentance for ways that you judge yourself. And it's like, oh, I got to experience more stuff. Haven't been through that much stuff in my life, you know, but it's like, no, you've just imposed it on yourself. And it's not to say that it's that much relative, but it's all relative. And it's like, at some point you got to be willing to just let that go, because that you're just continuing to hold yourself back right now. It's like, have you not, assuming that you haven't suffered enough, it's like you can stop that. Sometimes I get that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because it becomes its own act of suffering. Like even just thinking you need to be more is the suffering that you need to learn from. It's not any type of suffering, because that's the suffering. It's like, I still need to do something. I still need to get somewhere. There's still me, you know, all that, instead of just recognizing like that's just a mental plaything. It's a mental plaything. It's not something that's actually real. It's being trapped by it that we're talking about. Right. And so this is why I find it so fascinating that when you look at our physical life, like when you look at the trajectory of our life, there are so many times where we come up to a point in our life where we're going into the unknown, we're going into uncertainty. Let's say we have an opportunity, and yet we run from it. And we run from it because we don't like the feeling of going through it, because we get caught up in that idea of ourself. And so immediately it's like we change our path because of the story. Whereas the faith part, the humility part, the recognition of just continue on, you don't know, stop telling yourself a story, would walk us through almost all of this uncertainty, all of these opportunities, and out the other side. And that's really the question. What the fuck is that like? Because I know what it's like to run from the uncertainty. I know what it's like to go back to that idea of myself. I know what it's like to live within the world of the known. But I can't know what it's like to let go of knowing what it's like, unless I just do it. I can't see what's through uncertainty unless I'm just willing to be uncertain. And I'm more willing to do that if I let go of the idea of myself that can be threatened. And so I find that fascinating. And I find the fact that dualistic unity is the embodiment of that to a very large degree, because that's what we've been doing. We're just continuing on. We don't know where this goes. And it changes and adapts all the time. All the time. But in that, there's a level of excitement, because we're not trying to do the typical template of another business, which offers a sense of certainty and guarantees an exit strategy and blah, blah, blah. Like, we're not doing any of that. But because of that, we're all feeling fucking alive. You know, we're all alive. We're all excited to come to work in the morning. We go to bed at night feeling like, hell yeah. We wake up in the morning looking at shit to do and not going, oh, well, I got to do that. Like, for the most part, because it's our own shit. Like, that's amazing. That's an incredible experience, despite all the uncertainty and obstacles and challenges and everything else that goes with that, to not look at those as a wall between where we are and where we want to go, but to actually look at it as a part of where we are, and that being the experience in itself, where we are and what's happening now. What can I do with that? Just to see where that goes. That's fucking thrilling. To me, that's the unknown universe. That's what every fucking person you've ever read about who's done anything fucking amazing has ever said. Just fucking dare to try. You know, just get yourself out of the way and keep fucking going, and something will eventually happen.
Leap off that cliff.
And in that, you see like that you can be excited, you know, about waking up in the morning, about whatever's going to happen. That sense of, well, like, oh, this is work now, like doing work. It's like things are happening. You're doing stuff, whether you're typing something, responding to something, sharing something, adding something, learning something, like all of it's just what it is. It's like you can have opinions about it, but it's still just what it is. And like knowing that you're sharing yourself and your own sort of insights, because even with new things, like we're working through this email drip campaign, finishing that off, and just like trusting, exciting, like trusting myself to like just have something and not ask you guys, be like, hey, I will, don't worry, I'll send it over beforehand, because it's like a whole marketing thing, and that's a big thing for the company to have that. But like initially, I'm saying like just being able to pick stuff and be like, yeah, this sounds okay, this is good. Trust myself to have responded with enough, sensitivity and whatever to a response that someone's a question or anything. Like it's really just being willing to continue to step and like deal with any repercussions that arise without that, like, oh, there was no ill will in that response. I was just responding honestly and authentically. And then you can discuss after the fact if there was something, but to think that you have to, pre-do everything and like kind of tether yourself to like maintaining this track instead of just like, gonna be there and then deal with things as they show up.
Absolutely. Well, and that's ultimately what normally happens in a business. I've had it numerous times in employment where it's just like, you have to go and get approval. Like you have to go and you got to get input. And then it comes down as, often a critique because they're paying your ass. And so if they don't like what you've done, there's some negative fucking slant for it and all that. And that's not what we want to do here. And so I'll say for my part, and I appreciate, having the opportunity to give you feedback, but straight up, I'd be good with you just doing it and sending it out, doing it and having it done. Like, even if I didn't have the opportunity, because I trust you to do what it is your best. I trust you to put the attention into it that you deem appropriate, right? That's the whole point. So you're going to do the best that you can do in the same way that I would do the best that I can do. That said, it's a fucking email campaign. It's not like, later on, if we got feedback and somebody's just like, I didn't like that one. And you're just like, oh, maybe I'll change that shit up, because we all adapt, we all grow. And that in itself is what I'm saying. Like, there's no sense of what's right. There's just a sense of what can we do, right? And then if we want to all have input onto it, the ability to do that, knowing that even if we didn't do that, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like even if nobody ever got a chance to review the email campaign and you just hooked it up, I'm okay with that. Like I work with you on a daily basis. We all very much trust each other's, judgment and whatnot. And so that's cool. That's not something I've actually experienced in other business settings because it was never the focus. It was always a secondary or tertiary thing where it's like, we got to focus on the job, but now we'll do team building as opposed to, actually having an authentic relationship with myself first and working with other people who are doing the same with themselves. Right? Like the team isn't something we build. It's a result of being present. It's a result of not bringing baggage. It's a result of not needing to compete. It's a result of not having to measure ourselves and evaluate how we're doing and be approved and all that shit. That's what the team is. It's a result of ease and faith. And that's what excites me about this is that it's so profoundly different.
And a lot of that ease comes from, like you said, the faith and the humility, not making it about ourselves. No one's in the background thinking, I really should have more power. I really should have more authority. I really should have a different title. It's like no one is doing that because that's not the priority. And that's where we resonate with each other. That's why that's a contributing reason as to why the experience has been to it feels like having someone to build like to play with building blocks with. It just feels like reality is just like this infinite fucking kit of Lego blocks and we're all just building different things and no one's like criticizing each other's structures. We're sensitive to things that just make sense based on what blocks are available. And all of a sudden we've built something, we've made space, we've noticed new blocks and we're like, oh shit, that's a new shape, guys. And we're just sharing the experience because the experience is enough. The experience of being here right now for no particular reason is enough and worth it to us, because no one is making any promises to each other. We're not making any promises to you guys in the audience, the audience, in the comments, in the community, whatever we want to call it. No promises are being made, and also no promises are being needed. And so this is such a different space to be in, because I'm so used to things being so transactional, and things are not transactional in this space, because no one's looking for a payout.
Or even keeping track.
It's not a tit for tat, like, oh, I did this, so now you do that. Which again is just very much the same thing. It's just transactional. No one's keeping track of the accounting, because no one's feeling worried about being left out.
Yeah. There's no list of reciprocity.
No.
Because I'll say, for my part, that's been like one of the biggest priorities of my life, was to never think like that. I thought like that all the time, where it's like, oh, what about all the things I've done for you? And it was just a fucking story. And it's just like, there's such a cost to living like that. And yet we don't think there's a cost to working like that. We don't seem to think that that's a cost to our lives, regardless of how well the company does in terms of making money and profit. We don't see that as a detriment to our work culture.
We do. That's why we hate working. Literally. That's why we hate working, because of how we work. And yet we don't want to acknowledge that the way that we're working contributes to why we hate working. We just think it's work. It's this job. This job is the problem. It's like I have mopped floors and enjoyed myself more than people that I encountered with the penthouse corner office, or not the penthouse, but the corner office. It's like, it's not the job, in the same way that there are no, like, I love the phrase, there are no small roles, only small actors. You know what that really means, or what that means to me is that someone prioritized the actor more than the role. In the same way that you can prioritize your concepts over the experience of your life. And we see that in another way too, where it's like conceptual knowledge has a limit. You can read about something a lot, but you'll never understand it in the same way as you would through experiential knowledge. And experience has no limit. You can continue to experience things. You can't continue to think about something and to assume that by thinking about it more, you understand it more. But you could experience it more and have more considerations, something that will be actually useful to you over the concept, which can only take you so far.
Yeah, it's like you can always add to your palette, the paints. It's like you can keep adding new things. Like right now you have certain amount, maybe 10, 1,000, whatever number you want to use, of paints. And like every new experience that you use, that you do, that you have, that you go through, even just like, because each and every time, and I'll get focused on like, oh, new experiences, this, that. But as someone mentioned on a Patreon call recently, that need to feel better, and oh my God, even hold on, that need to feel a certain way about yourself. Mm-hmm. Holy fucking shit. As soon as I mentioned another Patreon call, like my mind, like that whole thought track just went away again.
It's like, abort. We can't be talking about this. This is classified information, damn it.
To our listener, all the juicy shit is happening on Patreon.
Clearly.
So many things. That's all this has been, is just a Patreon ad. And it's like, I really want to hear what it said on Patreon.
That's right, a Patreon tease.
You don't get that. Meanwhile, I'm dealing with my own deeper, like, forgetting what I'm saying, losing my train of thought. And it's like actually playing out where there's like a shitload of people who are like, oh, Patreon now. Oh, well, damn, what are these things that are, so profound that
you
people
can't talk about it.
You can't even remember how profound they are.
It's good by how uncomfortable we get.
Yeah, seriously. Like, first rule about Fight Club, don't talk about Fight Club.
Exactly.
Do talk about Patreon.
Leave the flyer in the printer. Wink, wink.
Yeah. We have a Patreon free trial for anyone curious.
We do. We have a free trial, and we have a fucking retreat coming up in Port Alberni.
Thanks, Marie.
On November 2nd, and right now it is available early access to Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. on Patreon. There's only, I think, four or five tickets left. And so if you'd like to join us in Port Alberni from a Saturday to the following Sunday, this is a dope retreat. It's going to be on Vancouver Island. There's massage therapists. There is a massage therapist that you are welcome to use. There's karaoke. We have live music. There's going to be yoga. We're going to go whale watching. It's a fucking blast, to say the least. We have a chef that cooks for us. And so we'll all be hanging, playing pool, chilling out, maybe going for a walk. And then somebody will walk over and go, hey, dinner's ready. And it is the best experience. It's so good because you're just like, oh, that's so perfect. And it's always the perfect time. And so if you would like to join us and you'd like to save a crap ton on that ticket, join us on Patreon. You can get access right now. Tickets are publicly available as of next week. So if you want to make sure that you get a spot at this event, definitely join us as soon as possible. That said, we also have a tier 1 call right after this, don't we? So that's cool. Patreon.com/Dualistic Unity. The Zoom details are already posted. So if you would like to join us on a call after this, be on the screen or just in the Zoom meeting with us, contribute, ask a question, share your thoughts, whatever it might be, please do. We'd love to have you there.
Oh, yeah. The Patreon calls, the retreats, they are just fantastic opportunities to show up. Just show up without so many expectations, feeling like you need to be something for someone. It's like, no, if everyone there is just being themselves and not making it about them, then just showing up and doing that, it's like it can feel like not making things about you can feel like a whole different experience because it is, and there isn't so much of the satisfaction that we're so used to, the pat on the back, the gold star type thing, like we get trained into going through school, but there isn't the weight, there isn't the weight as well of your own self expectations or living up to expectations that are out there. Like that's not necessary either. Like whatever, all those things that as you're living your life, it's like, oh, but this and that, and like ways that you judge yourself. Like you don't have to hold on to those. You're the only one staring at all those things anyway. It's like, can you let go of making it about you? Just making it about you, set that aside and be like, me feeling perfect or you trying to reach your highest self may not be what the best thing, highest self, whatever that means. It's like, maybe it's just what you're always expressing. Maybe it's just what you're always sharing, going through, dealing with, whatever. Even if you have this assumption that you don't bring that much to the table, it's like, that's just another thing that you're assuming about yourself. And you don't have to focus on those things. So anyway, yeah, Port Alberni, November. That's going to be incredible.
Woo!
That we're watching. Holy shit. Doing that. And the chef, the meals, they're always incredible. So finalizing details, but the tickets are available. They're out there and you get big discounts on Patreon. So might as well use that.
There's also some other dope shit on Patreon. Admittedly, right now, there are the details for our camping trip at the end of August. We are going camping at the end of February. I can't say exactly when, but it's already announced on Patreon. We're going to be camping on Vancouver Island on the Tofino side. The name of the campsite and the dates are on Patreon right now, available to anybody who's on Patreon. So if you would like to join us camping, come out to the island. All you have to do is bring your own gear, get your own tent site. We'll let you know where we are. And we'll meet you there, and you can hang out for as long as you can and see one of the most gorgeous fucking places in the world. People surf all year round on this fucking strip of land that is on the west side of Vancouver Island. It's gorgeous. You will absolutely love it, and we would love to see you. And that, of course, is not an event. February. No, I said August. I'm pretty sure I said August. I'm hoping I said August because nobody's camping at the end of February. But we are camping at the end of August.
Even though you could, because it is surfing all year round, but
Absolutely.
We're not camping at the end of February,
Absolutely.
end of August.
But yeah, if you can join us, the date is published on Patreon. All you'd have to do is just make sure you bring your own tent. Maybe, if you're in Canada, you can drive out. If you're not, you can fly out to Vancouver, take a car from there. It's a beautiful drive going through an old growth forest. You can actually see it, Canada's rainforest, because we have a rainforest on the west coast of Canada. which is actually on the Tofino side. So you can do that. There's no expense because we're not organizing it for you. You're in charge of your own food and substances and all of that stuff. We're just out there if you'd like to join us. But again, the details are on Patreon and Patreon only.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Plus, there's also the exclusive episodes that are recorded just for Patreon members. And so that's another cool thing to think of. And then there are other exclusive discounts on workshops, discounts on retreat tickets. Like it feels like the Patreon membership offers quite a bit. And that's only for now because the three of us have been working and thinking about how to expand and offer more to our Patreon members. So it's coming along quite nicely. And I definitely am looking forward to sharing more updates very soon about the expansion of our Patreon benefits.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even as it is now, like I think it would be tough to find a better Patreon offering than what
Straight up.
Patreon is looking like. Like we really are prioritizing community in a sense, interacting with ourselves. We don't need so much. And so, yeah, the priority is, things like groups 5 days a week.
Fuck yes.
Like, holy shit. And there's a free trial, tier 2 free trial. So you get to go to 5 days of group chats for that. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think
I just want to say, like the groups, I can't express this enough because often what happens is somebody's listening to the podcast and they come to a point where they take something I said and they get offended about it. And then they hold it against everybody on here. And if you have an issue with something I've said, that's fine. Let's talk about it. Let's have a chat. I'm happy to have that chat. So just either if you don't want to come to a call-in show, come to a group, use the free trial. It gives you a whole week to talk with me about what it is I've said. Maybe I'll learn something from it. Maybe I misspoke. So it's valuable to me as well and valuable to you because this is a conversation. We want to talk to you. If you have questions, if you have disagreements, if there are things that you're not sure about, if anything, help inform Dualistic Unity. Help us in terms of what it is we're expressing because we're all informed by each other and being willing to be a part of that is how this grows.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you can also, if you wanted to just jump in on a free public call that's every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, like that's another opportunity. That's not a Patreon trial, but if you just wanted to just jump in a little bit, put one toe in the water, join a free call. We do that every single week. And that's a great opportunity that doesn't take much more than 1 minute to fill out that form. And then you're on that call and you're able to chat with us directly. So today is Monday. So that the next free call is in 2 days.
Yeah. Good call.
Yeah.
And we have a call-in show tomorrow.
Right. That's right. The call-in show.
I'm glad we're mentioning all this because, for a long time with the podcast, there was like very little promotional discussion whatsoever, but like there's so many things going on. And like
all of which we've done deliberately.
Yeah. And like it really feels like what's that?
In charge as little as possible. Like a lot of that's free. The trial's free, the free group call, even the tier 1 membership for Patreon is $5 a month. Like
the Discord's totally free. I
and
know
the
that's
Discord's
something
totally
that usually
free.
Goes with Patreon memberships. Like it's crazy.
Yeah. A lot of things, like so much of this has been like setting the groundwork and it's like growing it, of course, as we go. But like right now feels like, with all of the investment stuff going on too, like really ready for a next chapter. And it's exciting. I mean, there's nothing but exciting things going on, especially because like there's no one who's really doing anything like this out there. Like not making it about themselves so much. And even as I say that, I'm like, like even talking about it, it feels like there's a twinge of like,
we are doing it. And I don't think that's the point though. The point is that we're sitting here just putting in the time into the conversation about not making it about yourself. And I mean, there is no way to have a podcast without somebody having to do the talking. And that person's always going to be in a position where other people are going to go, you're making it about you, regardless of what their intentions might be, just by virtue of the fact that they're the ones talking. Right. And so you could be totally selfless and people could still be suspicious of your motivations, but it really helps to remember that they are suspicious because of their own motivations.
And that's always like that degree of self-honesty too, where it's like you're just creating expectations for yourself. And like, if you have any thoughts about pretty much anything going on in reality, it's like, it's your own stuff. It's your own sort of response, your own judgments, your own expectations, your own things that you're looking at, not working through, but like have the capacity to not respond in that way, have the capacity to not do it. Because like the suffering is also self-involved. Like it's cyclical too. Anyone's response to anyone's way of doing anything, there's a difference with the discernment for sure, and like recognition when someone is acting selfishly. Even it's like there's an obviousness to it, and they usually experience it, and that's why you have to do other things to like mitigate the initial response, like being selfish, feel certain ways about yourself, and then respond by with some sort of coping mechanism, basically. And it's not freedom. It can feel like maybe you're a little more free just because you're comfortable when you think about yourself, but you got to cut yourself off from that degree of sensitivity by thinking about yourself. And you can't really have both.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say from the start, I think that's why Dualistic Unity has been formed the way it has. And I don't just mean like formed in terms of like, a good example is the max paywall in our organization. And all of our investors know that. It was in the investors pitch that nobody within the organization makes more than a certain amount per month ever. Everybody makes the same pay, and it's adjusted for inflation, but it's a reasonable pay. So right there, we're immediately taking out one component of selfishness. Nobody's making it about having more money than anybody else, right? Aside from that, there's also the fact that we stress repeatedly, this isn't spiritual. There's no path to follow, and thus there is no leader. Our retreats, for example, we lean fucking heavy on the fact that as much as we are facilitating the experience, we are not leading the experience. This is self-driven. This is very much based on everybody who comes to the table and what they want to make of it. And so repeatedly, there are these points that we make, like, it's not about us. It's not about us. It can't be about us. And that's why we consistently avoid these opportunities that most people would very easily want to take. And I know parts of us do. And that's why this is so much fun, is because we're aware of those parts. We talk about them every day. And as we talk about them and become more aware of them, we're able to actually deal with them and continue to watch the business grow with a little less us in the middle. All right. And that's kind of what's fun about it. But it really just comes down to the fact that it's not about us. It's very much about the audience. The groups are not about us. It's very much about the people who come. Even the local wing or the local end of what we're doing. It's not about us. It's about the businesses and the locals that we are empowering and bringing exposure to. We are always making it about everyone, because there's no division. That is making it about us, just not the us that we're thinking about. And I think that's what we mean by serving in heaven.
And how many new experiences are on the table with that too? Just the willingness to show up, just the willingness to be like, yeah, I'm going to, and like how much there can be a hesitation even about, like, oh, you're doing that for free. Like you should be getting paid for that thing, like that sense of whether it's, everything we're doing right now. Cause like, but with the business, like local business, for example, I'll use that, like just showing up to a business and like giving a review, giving a shout out, not expecting like brand deal immediately. Not to say that like something may not play out in the end, but it's just sharing something for the sake of sharing something. Like that's novel. Like that's not, I mean, people do it, people do stuff for that sense, but yeah, it's like, there's always sides of me that are like, with stuff like that, oh, you could do it this way. That's selfishness, but then it comes with so much additional weight too. It's like you feel it. If it's not about you, it's about your experience, and your experience shifts. Like everything about it can shift. It's like a different way of living, but it requires you to set yourself aside and just, show up and be like, all right. It's like taking those actions and not worrying so much about how it goes, because you are being honest with yourself and like, yeah, I'm just showing up. That's what it
And
is.
waking
Not
up
about me.
every day as a new person.
And you're starting, it feels like you're waking up like a new person because you're not recreating the person you created yesterday. And you're allowing that space between the canvas and the first paint stroke. And it's so often that we'll see someone who makes it about themselves, or they experience when you do that and how miserable that person is. You think of, like, for example, that comes to mind, like, it's my party and I'll cry if I want to. And it's like, yeah, but you don't realize that as you're crying, people are leaving that party.
Yeah.
So you totally can cry all you want in your party. That doesn't mean that that anyone's going to stay, that anyone should stay, and that you're not realizing the cost of making it all about you is that you leave no room for anything or anyone else. Yeah. Another example, bridezillas, like they make an event in their life, a day, a celebration, all about them, forgetting everyone else that's there and how miserable they look, and everyone looks around them. It's like we have, a boss that makes it all about them, and then employees hate working for him or her. Again, you take up so much room. The concept of you takes up so much room that it leaves no room for anything else to grow, anything else to be prioritized. And that experience is suffocating for everyone that happens to be in that bubble. And as the bubble keeps shrinking, there's less and less room.
But that's exciting. Like the idea that we can stop making that bubble, that we can actually experience something that's far more free, that's far more expansive, simply by not putting so many fucking walls in the way. So I think this is a great way to wrap up this episode. Actually, this has been a lot of fun. We started talking about God and the business and letting go and being yourself and authenticity. And we're going to continue this on Patreon in about 15 minutes. So we would love to see you there, everyone, if you can join us. Otherwise, we will be back tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern time for the call-in show. So we'd love to see you there as well. Andrew, it's been fun, man. Glad you got your package.
Been a blast. Likewise. Talk to everyone soon on Patreon.